Hello and welcome to this video. In this video, we are going to be performing some basic data cleaning. Before you begin the process of data cleaning, there are a few important questions to ask about the data you are going to clean. For example, are there missing values? Are there misspellings? Are there duplicate rows? Is there inconsistent formatting? And so on. The data set we are going to work with, we are only going to be looking out for missing values and misspellings. The data set we are going to be working with is relating to data that relates to crime incidents reports that have been provided by the Boston Police Department, and the data spans from June 15th, 2015 to August 17th, 2019. So this is the CSV file for the incident. It's called crime_Boston.csv. It's going to be available for you to download for this lecture. And I'm going to create a new notebook. If you notice here, I have started the Jupyter Notebook server in a new directory I created. And inside that directory, I have placed in this file called crime_Boston. So this is the CSV file that contains the data we want to clean. So I'm going to create a new notebook and use the Pandas library to read this data into memory. So I'm going to click on new here and click Python 3, and that will open up a new notebook page. I'll wait for it to load, and I'm just going to click on this untitled here and just give it a name. I'm going to call it data cleaning, and I'll click on the rename button to give the notebook a name. So the first thing I want to do is import pandas. So I type in import space pandas, and I want to be able to refer to it as an alias. So I do as PD, and I'll just run the cell. All right, so now I have the pandas library imported. The next thing I want to do is create a variable that I'm going to use to store the data set that Pandas is going to read in for me. So here in this cell here, I've created a variable called crime, and that variable here, I'm using the PD, which stands for the Pandas libraries, and alias for the Pandas library. And I'm using this read_CSV method from the Pandas library to read the data from this CSV file, which is called crime_Boston.csv. So I'm just going to run the cell so as to register this data with the variable. So now if I want to view the actual data set, all I need to do is just call the variable by name, which is crime, and then I'll run the cell, and that will display the data set. So this is the data set that Pandas has read in for us. So this is what the data looks like. You've got incident number, offense code, and so on. All right, so what we're going to try and do first is to check if there are any missing values. So this is what the crime incident report data frame looks like. The first thing I want to do here is to check if there are missing values, and the way we do that is to use a method called isNull. So I'm going to run the method on this variable called crime that contains this particular data set. So to find out the missing value from this data set, I'm referencing this variable called crime, which I've used to store the data set, and I am using the isNull method. So all I need to do now is just run the cell. I'll click run, and you can see here it's returned a Boolean value. Boolean value are basically true or false value. All right. So you can, as you can see here, it has returned a new data frame, and this data frame contains Boolean values, which are true or false value. All right. And in this data frame here, the false basically corresponds to values in the crime data frame that is not missing. So anywhere you see false, it means that the data is not missing. Where you see a true value, it means that the corresponding value in the crime data frame is missing. So you can see we've got some true here, which represents some values that are missing. Again, where you see the false, it means that the corresponding value in the crime data frame is not missing. Where you see a true, it means that the corresponding value in the crime data is missing. The next thing I want to do is to access only just the rows that contains missing values from the crime data frame. To do this, I'm using inside this cell here, I'm using the isNull method followed by a method called any. So this is the any method. And then once I've done that, in between the parentheses, we add the axis equals to 1. All right, so let me run the cell, and then you can see. So you can see here, it has returned true values. The true basically represents the data that is missing from the data set. This basically that has been returned is called a Pandas series. It contains booleans. So the booleans in each row of the series represents whether the corresponding row of the crime data frame contains a missing value. So as you can see here, we've got some true here. So the true basically means the corresponding row in the crime data frame contains missing values. If there was a false would mean the corresponding row in the crime data frame does not contain a missing value. The next step is to use this series to get the rows of the crime data frame that contains missing values. So to do this, I will store this series in a variable called rows with missing values. So you can see here in this cell, I've created a variable called rows with missing values that I'm going to use to store this series here. Okay, as you can see here, I've set this series to equals to this variable called rows with missing values. And on the next line here, I'm just referencing the variable called crime, and in square bracket, I'm passing in this variable called rows with missing values. So I'm just going to run the cell, and you can see here what it has returned. This data frame contains just the rows from the crime data set containing missing values. And note that the missing values are represented by this NaN. So anywhere you see NaN, that means there are missing value. As a part of cleaning this data, I want to drop the year, the month, and the hour column. Since this column here, we've got, if I just browse through, you can see a lot of the columns here. So we've got this column here that says occurred on date. All right, occurred on date column. This already includes both the date and time. So that is why I want to drop the year, the month, and the year columns. Okay, so if you look through here, we've got columns for the year, the month, and also the hour. All right, so I'm going to drop this hour column, drop the month, drop the year, because the information is contained in this column called occurred_on_date. So before dropping the column here, I've created a variable called cleaned_crime, and this variable here is going to contain a new data frame that is going to be generated once I run this cell. So this is the part of the code here that will drop the column, and the columns I'm going to drop is the year, the month, and the hour. And if we look at it here, the hour column is in capital, the month is in capital, and the year is in capital. So you need to represent it the way it is represented in the column. To register this variable to contain this data frame, you have to run the cell. So I ran the cell. So now if I just typed in the name of the new variable called cleaned_crime, if I run this, you can see here it has returned a new data frame. And if we look through, we should not see the hour, the month, or the year. So there's no year, no month, or hour. We've now removed that by dropping the columns, and then we stored it in a variable called cleaned_crime. The next thing I want to do is to use a method called the unique method from the Pandas library on each column in which I want to check for missing spellings. Note that a column in a Pandas data frame is represented as a Pandas series, and the unique method is used to return the unique values in a series in order of appearance. So the first column in which I want to check for missing spelling is this column here. There's a column called offense. This column here, offense_code_group. I want to check for missing spellings in that column. So this is how we represent it. I come here, I type in this cleaned_crime variable, and inside the square brackets, I pass in the column name and use the .unique method. So once I do that, I'm just going to run the cell. Notice that I've got an error here when I try to run the cell, which means it looks like the name is wrong. So offense is spelled O-F-E-N-S-E, so I missed the spelling, so I need to replace the C with an S. And then I'll run the cell again, click run, and you can see here it has now returned a new data frame. So all I need to do is just look through to see if there's any misspellings, and I've quickly scanned. I can't see any misspellings. The next column I want to check for missing spellings is this column here called offense_description. We've just checked the offense_code_group. There's no missing spelling there. Now I'm going to do the same with this offense_description. So this is how I would represent that. So I reference the variable called cleaned_crime. In square bracket, I pass in the column I want to check for missing values, and I'll attach the unique method. So I'm just going to run the cell and quickly scan through. As you can see here, I can't see any missing spellings. All right, so no missing spellings on this one. The next column I want to check for misspellings is this column here called day of the week. Again, I'm going to use the unique method on that one here. So here in this cell, again, under the cleaned_crime variable, I'm attaching this day of the week column, and inside that I'm using the unique method to check if there are any misspellings in that column. So I'm going to run the cell. I click run, and you can see here there are no misspellings in the data frame that was returned. So taking a look at the data frame, we can see here that the location column contains pairs of latitude and longitude. So it might be more convenient to have access to these values individually rather than in pairs. So as part of the cleaning of the data, I want to drop the location column since the lat and the long columns already express the latitude and longitude respectively. So I'm going to be dropping this location column. To drop the location column, you can see here I'm referencing this variable called cleaned_crime, and I've set it to equals to clean_crime.drop, and the column I'm going to drop is this location column. So I'm just going to run this. All right, and that basically registers the new data frame inside this variable. So now if I reference this variable called cleaned_crime and run this, you should see that the location column is no longer present. So if I scroll right to the end, you will see that the location column is no longer there. Notice that because I've used the drop here, so each time you drop, the call to drop returns a new data frame, which I have stored in this variable called cleaned_crime. And notice that the data frame that was previously stored inside this variable has now been replaced by the new data frame that was returned by this call to drop this column. Now, cleaning every aspect of a data set may take too long, but on the other hand, not cleaning a data set at all would lead to drawing inaccurate conclusions from the data. So it is important to try to find a balance when you're cleaning data. Also keep in mind that the decisions you make during data cleaning impacts all the data analysis you perform afterwards. So if there's a column you choose not to clean in your data set, have caution when you're using that column in analysis. Also know that it is helpful to explicitly keep track of what changes you make to your data set during the data cleaning, so you can always refer or roll back to your notes when you're doing your analysis. So that's it for this video. In this video, we were able to do some basic data cleaning, and hopefully you would have learned some important approaches to the data cleaning process. Thank you so much for watching. Bye for now.